Hey there, and a huge thank you for tuning into this video. With a sea of content out there, you've chosen this one, and I promise, it's gonna blow you away. At first glance, this might look like your typical heartwarming tale, but hold up. What if I told you it's so much more? This is a roller coaster of pride, humility, and a jaw-dropping twist that'll stick with you. It's about one moment of snap judgment spiraling into a life-changing reckoning. Meet Claire, a Beverly Hills waitress who thought she had everyone figured out, until a scruffy stranger walked in and flipped her world upside down. That stranger? Keanu Reeves, hiding a secret that'd unravel her in ways she never saw coming. What unfolds is a raw, real testament to the power of kindness and how one choice can turn a clash into a comeback. Stick around to the end, because this isn't just about a celebrity showdown, it's about facing yourself in the mirror and choosing who you want to be. Before we jump in, let's make some magic together. Hit that subscribe button, it's free, quick, and fuels more epic stories like this. Ready? Let's dive in. The Lumiere restaurant stood proudly on a shimmering boulevard in Beverly Hills, its grand facade glowing under the soft light of ornate street lamps. Wide, spotless windows framed the interior, offering passers-by a glimpse of a world drenched in opulence. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, scattering golden light across gleaming marble floors. The air carried the rich aroma of truffle-infused dishes and the subtle bouquet of expensive wines mingling with the gentle notes of a live jazz trio. Velvet-upholstered chairs cradled the city's wealthiest and most influential figures, their laughter and conversations buzzing faintly. Lumiere wasn't merely a place to eat, it was a stage for the elite. Claire navigated the dining room with practiced ease, her crisp uniform and neatly tied bun projecting an aura of professionalism. She had worked at Lumiere for years, rising through the ranks to become one of its most trusted waitresses. To her, this wasn't just employment, it was a badge of honor. She often bragged to friends about serving Hollywood's brightest stars and wealthiest moguls. But beneath her polished exterior lay a sharp edge. Claire had a habit of sizing up guests the moment they walked in. She judged them by their attire, their posture, even the way they spoke. Some people belong here and some don't, she'd think, her lips curling into a faint smirk. That evening, the restaurant hummed with its usual energy. Waiters gilded between tables, delivering plates adorned with delicate garnishes. The murmur of privileged voices filled the space. Claire stood near the reception desk, flipping through the reservation list with a colleague, her sharp eyes occasionally darting toward the entrance. She prided herself on knowing who mattered at Lumiere. The regulars, the CEOs, the actors, the socialites, received her warmest smiles. Everyone else got a cooler reception, a subtle reminder of their place in her carefully ordered world. The heavy glass doors swung open silently and a man stepped inside. He wore faded jeans, a plain gray shirt, and a jacket that looked worn but comfortable, devoid of any flashy logos. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his expression was calm, almost detached. Keanu Reeves moved with an unassuming grace, his presence blending into the background rather than demanding attention. Despite his fame, he carried none of the swagger typical of Beverly Hills. To the untrained eye, he might have been a tourist who'd wandered into the wrong establishment. Claire's gaze snapped to him as he approached the reception desk. She paused mid-sentence, her conversation with her colleague forgotten. Her eyes narrowed as she took him in. Those scuffed boots, that unremarkable jacket. He didn't fit. She tilted her head slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Good evening," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. The smile she offered was fleeting, more a formality than a greeting. "How can I assist you?" "I'd like a table, please," Keanu replied, his tone steady and polite. Her eyebrows shot up, skepticism flashing across her face. "A table?" she echoed, as if the request were absurd. She crossed her arms, leaning against the desk. "You do realize this is an exclusive restaurant, right? We cater to a very specific clientele." Her words carried a faint sting, a challenge disguised as clarification. Keanu nodded, unfazed. "Yes, I'm aware. I'd still like a table." Claire huffed, a short, incredulous sound escaping her. She straightened up, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from her sleeve. "Fine, give me a moment." She turned on her heel and marched to the small office behind the desk, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. At the computer, she typed his name, or what she assumed it might be, with exaggerated keystrokes, her annoyance palpable. The screen showed no reservations under Keanu Reeves. She rolled her eyes, muttering something about walk-ins before returning to the dining room. "No reservation," she announced triumphantly, as if she'd won a small victory. "We do have some tables available, but just so you're aware, this isn't a casual spot. Our menu reflects that." Her tone dripped with condescension, daring him to reconsider. "I'd like to stay," Keanu said simply, his calm demeanor unshaken. Claire sighed dramatically, snatching a menu from the stack beside her. "All right then, follow me." She strode off without waiting to see if he'd keep up, weaving through the maze of tables with purpose. The dining room glittered around them, guests sipping cocktails and nibbling on amuse-bouches, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding. She led him to the back of the restaurant, far from the glowing chandeliers and the prime window seats. The table she chose sat near the kitchen doors, where the clatter of pots and the occasional shout from the staff disrupted the ambiance. She dropped the menu onto the table with a sharp thud. "Here you are. Perfect spot for you," she said, her voice syrupy with false sweetness. "If you need me, just wave, but only if it's important." Keanu settled into the chair, offering her a small, genuine smile. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to it." Claire turned away, barely suppressing a scoff. As she walked back toward the front, she murmured to a nearby coworker, $10 says he's gone before the appetizers arrive." The coworker chuckled, casting a glance at Keanu, who was now calmly perusing the menu as if he hadn't a care in the world. From her perch near the reception desk, Claire kept an eye on him, her arms crossed and her expression smug. She was certain he'd falter, crumble under the weight of Lumiere's prices, or shrink from the elegance surrounding him. But Keanu remained steady, his posture relaxed, his focus on the menu unbroken. The jazz trio played on, their notes curling through the air, and for a moment the restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The minutes ticked by. A waiter approached Keanu's table and Claire watched intently, expecting him to order something cheap or ask for water and leave. Instead, he pointed to an item on the menu, his voice too low for her to hear. The waiter nodded and departed, leaving Claire frowning. She shifted her weight, her confidence wavering slightly. Maybe he'd stay longer than she'd thought, but she wasn't ready to admit she might have misjudged him. Not yet. Across the room, Keanu leaned back in his chair, the faint hum of the restaurant washing over him. He didn't seem to notice the sidelong glances from other patrons, or Claire's watchful stare. To him, this was just another meal, another moment. But to Claire, it was a challenge, a quiet test of her instincts, her pride, and the world she'd built within Lumiere's walls. Claire sauntered toward Keanu's table, her steps slow and deliberate, as if she were doing him a favor by even approaching. She clutched her notepad loosely, her eyes narrowing as they swept over his faded jacket and scuffed boots. "Made up your mind yet?" she asked, her tone clipped, barely hiding her judgment. Keanu glanced up, his face serene, almost annoyingly so. "I'll take the filet de rossini," he said simply, his finger resting on the menu's most extravagant option. Claire snorted, a sharp, mocking sound. "That's $350. You realize that, right? Sure you can handle it?" Her words hung heavy, daring him to back down. Keanu met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm sure," he replied, his voice smooth and steady. Claire's smirk twitched, her certainty shaken for a split second. She'd pegged him as someone who'd stumble over the prices, maybe mumble an apology and switch to soup. But he didn't. She scratched the order onto her pad, her grip tight enough to dent the paper. "Fine, your funeral," she muttered, loud enough for him to hear. Keanu just smiled faintly, a maddeningly calm gesture. "Thank you," he said. Claire turned sharply, her ponytail whipping as she stormed off, already plotting how to make him squirm later. At the bar, she sidled up to Tom, her coworker, who was wiping down glasses with a bored slump. "Get this," she said, her voice low and biting. "He ordered the Rossini. Thinks he's some big shot." Tom flicked his eyes toward Keanu, who sat quietly, hands resting on the table. "Maybe he is," he offered, his tone neutral. Claire laughed, a harsh bark. "With that outfit? He's delusional." Tom shrugged, clearly uninterested. But Claire pressed on. "I can't wait to see his face when the bill hits," she grinned, savoring the thought, while Tom just sighed and resumed his task. Across the room, an older man in a tailored suit sipped his wine, his sharp eyes tracking Claire's retreat. His silver hair gleamed under the soft lights, and his fingers tapped the table thoughtfully. Setting his glass down, he stood and approached Keanu with a steady gait. "Evening," he said, his voice rich with a hint of gravel. "I saw how she treated you. It's not right." Keanu looked up, his expression softening. "I appreciate it, but I'm fine," he said. The man frowned, unconvinced, but nodded. "Well, you've got more patience than most," he added before stepping back. Claire caught the tail end of the exchange and swooped in, her posture rigid. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her tone syrupy with fake concern, though her eyes flashed at the older man. "I'd hate for anyone to disturb our guest." The man straightened, his jaw tightening. "Just a chat," he said coolly, then returned to his seat. Claire glared at Keanu, her patience fraying. "Anything else you need?" she snapped, barely waiting for his polite "no, thank you" before stalking off, her heels stabbing the floor with each step. Nearby, a couple at a corner table watched the scene unfold, their faces tightening with disapproval. The woman, elegant in a deep red dress, leaned toward her husband. "She's awful to him," she whispered, her voice tight. "It's embarrassing." Her husband, a stocky man with a stern brow, nodded. "I'm not sitting through this," he said, raising a hand to flag a waiter. "Get me the manager," he told the young server, who scurried off with a nervous nod. The woman's eyes lingered on Keanu, impressed. "He's so composed," she murmured. Too good for her nonsense. Back at the bar, Claire grabbed a tray, her movements jerky with pent-up irritation. "He's still just sitting there," she complained to Tom, who was now polishing a wine bottle. "Like he's untouchable or something." Tom set the bottle down, his patience visibly thinning. "Ever think he might be?" he asked, his tone dry. Claire blinked, thrown off. "What, like he's some VIP in that getup?" She laughed again, but it sounded forced. Tom didn't bother responding, just gave her a look that said she'd figure it out eventually. Or not. Claire huffed, turning away, her mind buzzing with ways to prove she was right. The kitchen bell dinged and a chef barked, "Rossini for table 9." Claire snatched the tray, the steaming dish wobbling slightly as she carried it out. She approached Keanu's table with a tight smile, setting the plate down with a dramatic thud. "Your meal," she said, her voice laced with mockery. "Hope it's worth it." Keanu glanced at the dish, then up at her, his calm, unbroken. "It looks wonderful," he said, genuine warmth in his tone. Claire's smile froze, her sarcasm falling flat. She lingered, waiting for a crack in his facade, but he just picked up his fork. Her irritation spiked. "That's a dish for real connoisseurs," she said, leaning in slightly, her words sharp. "Not just anyone can appreciate it." Keanu nodded, cutting into the meat with precision. "I'll do my best," he replied, unruffled. Claire's hands balled into fists at her sides. Why wouldn't he bite back? She spun away, nearly knocking over a chair in her haste to escape his unshakable calm. Behind her, Keanu took his first bite, savoring it quietly, as if the chaos around him didn't exist. Tom watched from the bar, shaking his head slightly. "You're in over your head, Claire," he muttered, too low for anyone to hear. He'd seen plenty of servers misjudge customers before, but Claire's stubbornness was something else. He glanced at Keanu, noting the subtle ease in his posture, the way he carried himself. Something about it didn't add up with Claire's assumptions, but Tom wasn't about to play detective. He just hoped she'd cool off before she made a bigger fool of herself. The older man, now settled back at his table, pulled a pen from his pocket and scribbled in a small leather notebook. "Remarkable," he whispered to himself, a faint chuckle escaping. He'd seen his share of scenes like this, but Keanu's poise stood out. He tucked the notebook away, sipping his wine as his mind turned over possibilities. Who was this guy? He didn't know yet, but he intended to find out. Quietly, of course. The couple waited impatiently, the husband tapping his foot under the table. "Where's that manager?" he grumbled, his voice low but firm. His wife squeezed his hand. "Give it a minute," she said, though her own frustrations simmered. "I just hope they do something about her." They both glanced at Keanu, who ate steadily, untouched by the brewing storm. "He doesn't even seem to care," the husband noted, almost admiringly. "Takes guts," his wife agreed, her tone softening as she watched him. Claire circled back to the kitchen, her thoughts a jumble of anger and confusion. She didn't get it. How could he sit there so smugly, like her barbs didn't even register? She grabbed a pitcher of water, sloshing it slightly as she moved. "I'll make him crack," she muttered under her breath, though she wasn't sure how. Maybe when the bill came, he'd finally show his true colors. She clung to that thought, needing it to be true, because the alternative, that he really was unfazed, felt like a personal defeat. The restaurant hummed with its usual rhythm, the clink of glasses and murmur of voices filling the air. Keanu remained the eye of the storm, his focus on his meal unwavering. The jazz band played on, a mellow backdrop to the tension rippling through the room. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, his movements deliberate, almost meditative. To him, this was just dinner. To everyone else, it was a battlefield, and Claire was charging headfirst into a fight she didn't fully understand. By the end of the night, the stakes would shift, though not how Claire expected. Keanu's quiet strength had already begun to unravel her certainty, drawing the attention of those around him. The older man's curiosity, the couple's indignation, Tom's subtle warnings, all were threads in a web tightening around her. But for now, she pressed on, blind to the shift, determined to come out on top. Keanu, meanwhile, took another bite, his secret safe for a little while longer. Claire's nerves frayed as she darted between tables, her tray wobbling under the weight of half-filled wine glasses. Keanu sat near the window, his dusty boots tucked under the table, a stark contrast to the polished clientele around him. She'd served him last in part 2, a deliberate slight, and now his unwavering calm gnawed at her. She flashed a tight smile at a group of chattering socialites, her eyes cutting toward him. Still no reaction, her jaw clenched. She hated how he seemed immune to her disdain. She turned sharply, nearly spilling a drink, her frustration bubbling dangerously close to the surface. The kitchen buzzed with chaos, pots clanging as the chef barked orders over the hiss of sizzling pans. "Claire, table 6 has been waiting 10 minutes, he shouted, his face red. She waved him off, adjusting her apron with a shrug. "They're fine, and so's he," she said, nodding toward Keanu's table. The chef's eyes narrowed, but he turned back to his stove, muttering about her attitude. A junior waiter, Sam, lingered nearby, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd seen Claire's games before. Petty, pointed, but this felt different, sharper. He glanced at Keanu through the pass, wondering why she cared so much. At the bar, Tom leaned against the counter, his rag moving in slow circles over a spotless glass. He watched Claire flit around, her movements jerky, her usual poise unraveling. "She's losing it," he said to Mia, the hostess, who was stacking menus nearby. Mia smirked, her eyes following Claire. "She's got a chip on her shoulder about that guy, thinks he's slumming it here." Tom shook his head. "He's not fazed, though. That's what's killing her," Mia chuckled, but her gaze lingered on Keanu, curiosity flickering. He didn't look like the usual crowd. Maybe there was more to him. The older man with silver hair sat alone, his notebook open, pen scratching across the page. He'd been observing since part 2, catching every snide remark Claire threw Keanu's way. Now, his lips twitched into a grin as she stormed past, her tray rattling. "Pride before the fall," he murmured, jotting it down. He'd written about worse divas in his column, but Claire's unraveling was a slow-motion wreck. He sipped his bourbon, eyes darting to Keanu, who ate quietly, oblivious or indifferent. The man wondered if Keanu was hiding something big, a scoop waiting to drop. Claire finally approached Keanu's table, her steps clipped, her tray slamming down harder than necessary. "Your steak," she said, her voice icy. "Hope it's worth the wait." He looked up, his brown eyes steady, almost warm. "Looks great, thanks." She blinked, thrown by his sincerity, then recovered with a sneer. "It's a $50 cut, not exactly bar food." He nodded, cutting into it with care. Good meat," he said simply, her fists balled at her sides. She wanted a fight, not this quiet acceptance. The room seemed to tilt, her controls slipping as heads turned her way. The couple at the corner table whispered fiercely, their patience thinning. "She's ignoring us now," the husband growled, his fork tapping the table. His wife sighed, her gaze shifting to Keanu. "He's taking it better than I would. She's a piece of work." The husband snorted. "If the manager doesn't show soon, I'm walking out." They'd complained about slow service earlier, but Claire's fixation on Keanu was making it personal. The wife studied him, intrigued. His calm felt deliberate, rehearsed. Maybe he's used to worse, she mused, a red herring planted to mislead them all. Tom caught Claire's eye as she stormed past the bar, her face flushed. "Ease up," he warned, his tone low. "You're turning this into a circus." She spun on him, her voice a hiss. "He doesn't belong here, Tom. Look at him." Tom glanced at Keanu, worn jacket, scuffed boots, but saw no threat, just a guy eating dinner. "You're the one acting out of place," he said, turning back to his glasses. Claire's laugh was jagged, bitter. "Oh, slip up. I'll make sure of it." Tom sighed. She was too far gone, blind to her own spiral. In the kitchen, Sam hovered near the pass, watching Claire's latest clash with Keanu unfold. He'd overheard her earlier, muttering about riff-raff ruining the restaurant's vibe. Now she was back, grabbing a dessert tray with shaking hands. "You okay?" Sam ventured, his voice timid. She shot him a glare. "Mind your own business." He backed off, but worry gnawed at him. Claire was the senior staff, but this vendetta was new. He peeked at Keanu again, wondering if the guy was some undercover critic, testing them all. The thought stuck, a subtle misdirection. The older man's pen flew faster, his notebook filling with sharp observations. Claire's hostility, Keanu's restraint, it was gold for his next piece. He scribbled a line about hubris, then paused, studying Keanu's hands. Calloused, steady, not a desk jockey, he thought, spinning a theory about a blue-collar millionaire slumming it for kicks. Another red herring, but it fueled his glee. He waved Sam over, ordering another drink. "Keep an eye on that table," he said, nodding toward Keanu. "Something's brewing." Sam nodded, uneasy, drawn deeper into the unfolding drama without realizing it. Claire returned to Keanu's table, her voice louder now, edged with desperation. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, her sarcasm thick. He chewed slowly, then nodded. "Food's good, place is nice." She leaned in, her shadow falling over him. "It's not for everyone, you know. We've got standards." A hush rippled through the room, diners craning to listen. Standards shouldn't mean judging people by their shoes. Her breath hitched. He'd turned her barb against her, and she had no comeback. She straightened, cheeks burning as whispers spread like wildfire. The couple stood abruptly, the husband's chair scraping the floor. "Enough," he snapped, tossing his napkin down. "I'm getting the manager myself." He marched off, his wife trailing behind, her eyes darting to Keanu with a mix of pity and respect. "He's got more class than she'll ever have," she murmured. They disappeared into the back, leaving the room buzzing. Claire faltered, her bravado cracking under the weight of their exit. She'd pushed too far, and now the consequences were closing in, tension coiling tighter, ready to snap. Tom watched from the bar, his gut twisting. Claire was a train wreck, and Keanu was the immovable object she'd crashed into. "She's done for," he muttered to Mia, who nodded grimly. "Manager's gonna flip when he hears this." They both glanced at Keanu, who sipped his water, serene amid the chaos. Tom frowned. Something about the guy's composure felt too perfect, like he'd seen this play out before, another red herring, hinting at a backstory they couldn't guess. Mia nudged him. "Think he's some big shot?" Tom shrugged. "Maybe, or just smarter than her." The manager burst from the back, his tie askew, sweat beading on his forehead. The husband trailed him, still fuming. "What the hell's going on out here?" the manager demanded, his voice sharp. Claire froze, her tray trembling. "Just a misunderstanding," she lied, but her tone betrayed her. The manager's eyes landed on Keanu, then widened. "Mr. Dawson," he stammered, recognition dawning. The room gasped. Claire's tray hit the floor, shattering a glass. "Who?" she croaked. The manager glared at her. "He's the silent partner, owns half this place." Her world imploded, her arrogance exposed in a single brutal twist. Keanu rose, his presence suddenly towering despite his quiet demeanor. "I didn't want a scene," he said, his voice steady. "Just dinner." He turned to Claire, not unkindly. "You don't need a title to treat people decently." The diners murmured, some nodding, others gaping. The older man scribbled furiously, his grin wide. This was better than he'd dared hope. The couple returned to their table, stunned but satisfied. Claire stumbled back, her face ashen, her certainty shattered. She'd misjudged him completely, and the fallout was hers alone to bear. The manager clapped his hands, trying to regain control. "Back to work, everyone," he barked, then lowered his voice to Keanu. "I'm so sorry, sir. She'll be dealt with." Keanu waved it off. "Talk to the staff later. We'll fix this." He sat back down, resuming his meal as if nothing had happened. Claire retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking, her pride in tatters. The room settled, but the air thrummed with unspoken questions. Who was he really, and what came next? The stage was set, the tension peaking for the upcoming conflict. The dining room was cloaked in an eerie stillness as Keanu rose from his seat, his rugged jacket and weathered boots standing out against the polished elegance of the restaurant. Claire's hands faltered, her tray slipping and crashing to the floor in a symphony of broken china and scattered cutlery. Her eyes widened, her breath hitching as she processed the impossible. "You're the owner?" she gasped, her voice trembling with disbelief. Keanu's expression was unreadable, his voice steady yet piercing. "Part owner, to be exact. But that's not what matters. What matters is how you treated me, Claire, judging me by my clothes, assuming I didn't belong." The room seemed to hold its breath, diners frozen in their seats, their meals forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. Mr. Thompson, the manager, hovered nearby, his face a mask of mortified panic. "Sir, I didn't know you'd be here tonight," he stammered, wringing his hands. Keanu silenced him with a glance. "You shouldn't need to know my title to treat me decently. This restaurant was built on hospitality, for everyone, not just the well-dressed." Whispers spread like wildfire among the guests, some nodding in quiet approval, others exchanging uneasy looks. An older man at a corner table scribbled furiously in a notebook, his eyes gleaming with interest. Claire's knees buckled, and she collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to offend you. I thought—" Her words dissolved into sobs, her composure shattered. Keanu crouched beside her, his tone softening slightly but still firm. "Claire, listen to me. You're not irredeemable. You made a mistake, a serious one, but you can still make it right." She looked up, her tear-streaked face desperate for redemption. "How? Please, tell me how." Keanu straightened, his voice carrying across the room. "Staff meeting, now. Back room, everyone." The employees hesitated, exchanging nervous glances, then filed out obediently, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. The diners leaned forward, buzzing with curiosity, their earlier elegance replaced by rapt attention. The older man slipped his notebook into his pocket, a smirk tugging at his lips. This was the kind of drama that sold papers. Keanu's presence dominated the space, his calm authority a stark contrast to the chaos he'd just ignited. In the back room, the staff formed a ragged circle, their expressions ranging from dread to intrigue. Keanu stood at the center, his posture relaxed but commanding. "Tonight was a test," he began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Not just for Claire, but for all of us. This place was founded on a simple principle, exceptional food and service for anyone who walks in. But we've strayed. We've started sizing people up by their looks, their money. That's not who we are, or who we should be." He paused, scanning their faces, letting the weight of his words settle. Claire lingered at the edge, tears staining her uniform, her head bowed in shame. Keanu turned to her, his gaze steady. "Claire, you'll apologize to everyone here. Then, you're on probation, 30 days. You'll work every job, dishes, hosting, waiting tables. You'll prove you belong here." She nodded, her voice faint but resolute. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his brow creased with doubt. "Sir, she insulted you publicly. Why not let her go?" Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Because firing her is too easy. She needs to learn, to grow. That's what this place stands for." Tom, a seasoned waiter, cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, Claire's been judgmental for months. Tonight wasn't a one-off." Keanu nodded gravely. "You're right. That's why we're all accountable now. Starting tomorrow, we're overhauling everything. Mandatory training on service, empathy, inclusivity. We're rebuilding this restaurant's soul." Mia, a young hostess, blinked in surprise. "That's a big change," she said, her tone a mix of awe and apprehension. Keanu offered a faint smile. "It is. But it's overdue. We've let pride and prejudice creep in. We're done with that." He began pacing, his voice rising with conviction. "If any of you don't want to adapt, you can walk out now, no judgment. But if you stay, you're signing up to treat every guest with dignity, no exceptions." The room fell silent, the staff absorbing his ultimatum. Claire stepped forward, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm staying. I want to change." Keanu met her gaze, nodding slightly. "Then start with your apology." She turned to the group, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry. To Mr. Dawson, to all of you. I was arrogant, rude, and wrong. I'll do better, I swear." Her words hung in the air, fragile but earnest. Tom folded his arms, his tone firm but fair. "Prove it, Claire. We'll see." She nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Keanu clapped his hands sharply. "Back to work, everyone. We've got guests waiting." The staff dispersed, their chatter subdued but tinged with cautious optimism. Keanu lingered, watching Claire adjust her apron with trembling hands. "You'll get through this," he said quietly. "Focus on why you're here. To serve, not to judge." She managed a small smile. "I will. Thank you, Keanu." The dining room stirred back to life as the staff returned, the jazz band striking up a gentle tune to ease the tension. The older man approached Keanu, grinning slyly. "That was something else. Mind if I run it in the Chronicle?" Keanu shrugged. "Go for it. Just keep the focus on the lesson, not the spectacle." The man chuckled, tipping an imaginary hat. Keanu turned to a nearby couple who were still staring. "Sorry for the disruption," he said sincerely. The wife smiled warmly. "No need. You showed us what real leadership looks like." Claire moved through the room with a quiet grace she'd never shown before, her interactions tentative but genuine. She caught Keanu's eye and offered a small nod, which he returned, a silent pact of trust and accountability. The older man slipped out, his story already taking shape in his mind. The restaurant hummed with a new energy, not just of wealth and prestige, but of humility and purpose. Keanu returned to his table, his meal cold, but his resolve warm. The night had been a reckoning, and the path ahead was clear. He leaned back, reflecting on how distant he'd become from this place he'd helped create. Tonight had been a wake-up call, for him as much as anyone. He'd been content to let others run it, assuming the vision would hold. It hadn't, but now, he'd step up, ensure it became what it was meant to be. A haven of hospitality, not a shrine to status. He left a generous tip, then stood, casting one last look around. The hardest part was over. Now the real work, rebuilding, could begin. The restaurant had slipped into a fragile stillness, the final chords of the jazz band dissolving into the faint murmur of settling chairs and the occasional clink of glassware being stacked in the kitchen. Claire lingered near the bar, her fingers brushing absent-mindedly against the frayed hem of her apron, its threads worn thin from a night that had stretched her patience and pride to their limits. The air carried the lingering scent of roasted garlic and candle wax, a sensory echo of the evening's chaos. Her chest ached with a cocktail of emotions, shame for her earlier outburst, gratitude for Keanu's unexpected compassion, and a tentative spark of hope she hardly dared to name. She stared at his vacated table, the chair angled slightly askew, the napkin folded with care beside a glass of water he'd never touched. His parting words looped in her mind like a mantra. "Mistakes don't define you. How you rise from them does." She pressed her lips together, her breath uneven, and murmured to the empty room, "I can do this. I have to." Keanu stepped out from the kitchen, his jacket draped casually over one shoulder, his broad frame casting a shadow across the polished floor. He paused near Claire, his dark eyes scanning the dining area as if measuring the weight of the night's events. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but firm, carrying the steady timbre of someone who'd faced his own reckonings. "It's not about perfection, Claire. It's about showing up, day after day, with the will to grow." She met his gaze, her throat tightening as she fought back the sting of tears. "I'll try. I mean it. I won't let this be who I am." He nodded, a faint smile softening the edges of his expression. "That's enough for a start. You've got people in your corner. Don't forget that." With a final glance around the space he'd built, he turned toward the exit, his figure briefly haloed by the amber glow of the restaurant's sign spilling through the glass door. Claire watched him go, a quiet resolve taking root in her chest, bolstered by the lifeline he'd thrown her. The staff moved through their closing duties with an unfamiliar tenderness, their usual hurried efficiency replaced by something softer, more deliberate. Tom stood behind the bar, wiping down the counter with slow, methodical strokes, his brow furrowed as if he were polishing away the night's tension along with the smudges. Mia gathered the menus, her hands steady now, her earlier sharpness dulled into a reflective calm as she hummed a tune under her breath. Sam pushed the broom across the floor in smooth, even arcs, the bristles whispering against the hardwood, each sweep a quiet acknowledgement of the shift they'd all felt. The atmosphere had transformed, less a battlefield, more a sanctuary. Claire joined them, her fingers still trembling slightly as she began folding napkins, each crease a small, purposeful act of atonement. She worked alongside her colleagues in silence, their collective rhythm a fragile but tangible bond, forged in the aftermath of vulnerability. Outside, the older man lingered on the sidewalk, his notebook clutched against his chest, the cool night air ruffling the edges of his coat. A faint smile curved his lips as he replayed the evening in his mind, a messy, beautiful collision of human frailty and grace. He'd come for a story, expecting little more than a glimpse into a billionaire's world. But he'd found something richer, a lesson in resilience, unscripted and raw. As his cab rolled to a stop, he cast a final look at the restaurant, its windows glowing like embers against the dark. In his head, he drafted the opening line, "A billionaire's meal serves up redemption for a struggling waitress." But the real narrative lay beneath the headline, in the courage it took to stumble and stand again. He tipped his hat to the building, a silent salute to the night's quiet triumph, then slid into the cab, already anticipating the words he'd weave. Keanu stepped into the night, the city unfurling before him in a tapestry of flickering lights and distant horns. The pavement glistened faintly from an earlier drizzle, reflecting the neon signs in fractured bursts of red and blue. He hadn't intended to step so fully into the spotlight, to lay bare his identity and intervene so directly, but the evening had demanded it. It had also revealed a truth he couldn't ignore. The restaurant, his haven, had drifted from its purpose under his absence. He'd trusted others to carry its heartbeat, connection, kindness, authenticity. But that trust had faltered. As he walked, the cool air brushing his face, he resolved to reclaim it, to steer it back to the vision that had birthed it. The night had been a mirror, reflecting not just Claire's struggle, but his own. Change, he mused, began with a single choice, a single soul daring to shift. Tonight, that seed had been sown. He blended into the stream of late-night wanderers, a calmness settling over him, the city's pulse syncing with his own. Back inside, Claire turned the key in the lock, the metallic click slicing through the silence. She pivoted slowly, her eyes sweeping over the dining room. The tables cleared, the chairs neatly aligned, the faint shimmer of polished silverware catching the dim light. The stillness wrapped around her like a balm, soothing the raw edges of her nerves. Tomorrow loomed large. Probation, the humbling task of scrubbing dishes, the cautious glances of her co-workers, but she welcomed it all, eager to prove herself, to rebuild what she'd nearly shattered. Keanu's charge lingered in her ears, serve with heart, and she clung to it like a compass. She'd start small, with the grit of soap suds and the weight of a tray, earning trust brick by brick. The path ahead was daunting, her pride still bruised, but she felt ready to tread it. With a steadying breath, she flicked off the lights, the shadows swallowing the room in a gentle embrace. The night had ended, but her story, her real story, was just beginning. As the lights dim on this tale of grace and growth, we're left with a powerful reminder. True worth isn't found in designer labels or polished shoes. It's in the respect we show every soul we meet. Claire's journey from judgment to humility, sparked by Keanu's quiet strength, teaches us that kindness can transform even the hardest hearts. So ask yourself, how often do we let first impressions cloud our judgment? Next time you encounter a stranger, will you look beyond the surface and see the story they carry? Thank you for joining us on this journey. If Claire's transformation touched your heart or made you rethink the power of empathy, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay with us for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the beauty in second chances. Your support means the world. See you in the next video.